At 600 feet, the left engine of the Gulfstream G550 seized with a sound that wasn't in any flight manual. 5 lives, including a mocking CEO's, now depended on the single dad mechanic she'd ridiculed just hours before for the oil stain on his coveralls. The mechanic was Leo Vance, left to raise his 7-year-old son alone after his wife's illness. The CEO was Alexandra Thorne, who built a billion-dollar tech empire from nothing. Their worlds collided on the tarmac of a private airfield, where a single dismissive comment would hang in the air until the moment the engine failed. This is what happened in the 50 minutes between the insult and the explosion. Leo Vance's day began at 4:45 a.m., not with a stock ticker, but with the sound of his son's asthma nebulizer in their small apartment over the repair hangar. By 6, he had made lunches, checked homework, and dropped 7-year-old Sam at the bus stop. By 6:30, he was under the cowling of a Cessna Citation, his hands tracing fuel lines with a familiarity born of 16 years in aviation mechanics. He held the highest certification possible, an airframe and powerplant license from the FAA, a title that meant less to most clients than the oil smudged on his shirt. The regional airfield where Leo worked serviced a mix of crop dusters, vintage hobby planes, and the occasional private jet. The money was in the jets. His boss, a man named Rick who cared more about invoices than integrity, had assigned him the morning's big-ticket item, a pre-purchase inspection for a potential buyer of a Gulfstream G550. The owner was selling. The potential buyer was arriving at 10 a.m. sharp. Leo's job was to give it a final once-over, sign off on the logbooks, and collect a hefty fee for the service. But Leo already had a bad feeling. 2 days prior, during the standard inspection, he'd found a minor discrepancy in the left engine's oil pressure readings during a full-power run-up. It was intermittent, a flicker on the gauge that stabilized. The plane's current owner, an investment firm that leased it out, dismissed it as a sensor ghost. They provided a recent service report from a high-end facility in another state showing everything within spec. Rick told him to stop looking for problems that weren't there. The deal was worth millions. Their inspection fee was $20,000. Don't rock the boat. At 9:55, a black Range Rover pulled onto the tarmac. Alexandra Thorne stepped out. At 34, she was a staple of tech magazine covers, having sold her first startup for a figure with 9 zeros. She moved with the impatient velocity of someone who billed time in seconds. Her pilot, a former Air Force captain named Briggs, greeted her warmly. She barely nodded. Her focus was on the jet, a sleek silver bullet that represented her latest milestone. She was here to finalize the purchase and fly it immediately to a make-or-break investor meeting in Denver. Leo approached, logbook in hand. He wore his standard dark gray coveralls, a few strategic stains from that morning's work on the Cessna. He introduced himself. Alexandra's eyes did a quick, dismissive scan, the coveralls, his hands, the faint line of grease near his temple he'd missed at the sink. She cut to the chase. "Is it clean?" Leo said the inspection was complete, but he wanted to discuss the left engine's oil pressure history. He mentioned the flicker. Here is where the first crack appeared. Alexandra sighed, a sound of profound exasperation. She looked past him to Rick, who was hovering nervously. "You're telling me this now? The report from Apex Aviation says it's perfect." Leo held his ground. Reports don't always catch intermittent issues. A second look under a full load test could rule it out. It would take an hour. Alexandra checked her watch. "I have a closing in Denver in 5 hours. I don't have an hour." She turned to her pilot. "Briggs, you trust the Apex report?" The pilot, professional but cautious, said Apex was top tier, but a second opinion never hurt. She shook her head. "It hurts $500,000 if I miss this meeting." Then she looked back at Leo. Her voice lowered, not with confidentiality but with condescension. "You've done your job. I appreciate your thoroughness. But I need you to finish up and sign the book." She took a half step back, her nose wrinkling slightly. "And maybe on the next one start with a cleaner shirt. You smell like grease." The words hung in the cool morning air. Rick looked at the ground. Briggs shifted uncomfortably. Leo's expression didn't change. He'd heard variations of this his entire career, the subtle language of class that separated the people who owned the machines from the people who understood them. He simply gave a tight nod, signed the logbook under the line that said "No discrepancies noted," and handed it to Rick. His professional opinion was now officially overruled. By 11 a.m., the Gulfstream was being fueled. Leo watched from the hangar doorway, his morning coffee gone cold. He saw Alexandra laughing with her assistant on the tarmac, the insult clearly forgotten by her. He thought about the oil pressure gauge. He thought about Sam's school play that night. He forced himself to turn away. It wasn't his plane, not his problem. At 11:17, the engine spooled up with a smooth, powerful whine. The jet taxied to the runway. Leo was inside now, helping a customer with a propeller repair, but the sound of the takeoff roll was unmistakable. The roar built, peaked, and then began to fade as the plane climbed. He allowed himself a moment of relief. Maybe he was just being paranoid. Maybe the sensor was faulty. Maybe everything was fine. Then at 11:19, his cell phone lying on the workbench buzzed. It was an unknown number. He almost ignored it. Something made him answer. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, but threaded with pure terror. It was Pilot Briggs. "We have a catastrophic left engine failure at 600 feet. We are declaring an emergency. The caution panel is lit up like a Christmas tree. We are turning back. Can you talk to me?" In the background of the call, Leo could hear the screaming whine of the remaining engine at full power, the frantic voice of the co-pilot calling out airspeed, and the persistent, blaring master warning alarm. He could also hear another sound, clear and sharp. Alexandra Thorne's voice, stripped of all its earlier arrogance, shaking as she asked one question over the intercom. "Is he still on the phone?" Leo's world narrowed to the crackle of the phone line and the mental schematic of a Gulfstream G550's engine bay. He didn't have time for anger, for remembering the insult. 5 lives were in a metal tube with one failed engine and one screaming to compensate. He grabbed a pen and an old invoice, his voice dropping into a calm, rhythmic pattern he hadn't used since his military training years ago. "Copy that, Briggs. I'm here. Talk to me. What's the #1 gauge telling you right now?" "Oil pressure on the left engine is 0 and falling. Temperature is spiking into the red. We have a fire warning light." The co-pilot's voice, younger, sharper with fear, cut in. "We've discharged the fire bottle. The light is still on." Leo closed his eyes, picturing it. A fire warning after bottle discharge usually meant a real fire, not a false sensor, but the bottle should have knocked it out, unless the leak was massive and ongoing. Fuel or worse, hydraulic fluid spraying on a hot surface. He made a decision. "Briggs, you need to shut down the left engine completely and feather the propeller. Now, confirm the fire handle is pulled." A pause filled with muffled shouts and switches flipping. "Left engine shutdown confirmed. Prop is feathered. Fire warning light is still illuminated." That was bad. The fire was likely still there, burning somewhere the extinguishing agent couldn't reach. The plane was now flying on a single engine, losing altitude slowly, heavy with fuel meant for a trip to Denver. They had maybe 20 minutes of safe flight time before the strain on the right engine caused its own failure. They needed to land yesterday. Leo's mind raced through the checklist. The immediate threat was the fire spreading to the wing fuel tank, or the hydraulic lines that controlled the landing gear and flaps. "Okay, listen carefully. The fire bottle system has 2 lines. You use the primary. There's a secondary manual discharge for the engine bay. It's a T-handle on the overhead panel labeled Secondary Engine Fire Suppression. Do you see it?" He heard fumbling, then Briggs, "Found it, pull it." "Pull it now." A second later, a hiss echoed faintly down the line. The co-pilot's voice, breathless. "Lights out. Fire warning is out." A wave of relief, thin and temporary, washed over Leo. The immediate existential threat was contained, but they were not safe. They were a wounded bird over a mix of suburbs and light industrial parks with one overworked engine. The airport was 12 miles away into a slight headwind. It was going to be a long, slow, terrifying 12 miles. Inside the Gulfstream's cabin, the roar was unbalanced, a violent shuddering hum from the right side doing all the work. Alexandra Thorne was strapped into a leather seat, her knuckles white. The scent of burnt chemicals lingered. She heard only one side of the conversation, the mechanic's calm, insistent questions. The man she dismissed as smelling of grease was now the anchor point of her universe. Her assistant was quietly crying. Her chief financial officer, also on board, was reciting what sounded like a prayer. Alexandra's mind, usually a torrent of calculations and strategies, was blank except for one searing image, the mechanic's unflinching face as she'd insulted him. The shame was a physical burn in her chest, hotter than the engine fire. Briggs came back on, strain evident. We're maintaining altitude, but our airspeed is marginal. The right engine temperature is climbing. It's not designed for this load solo. What's our play, Leo? You need to reduce weight immediately. Dump fuel. There's no fuel jettison system on this model. Briggs shot back, a note of despair entering his voice. Leo knew that. He'd studied the manual for this very plane during the inspection. Think, Leo, think. No jettison, so they had to burn it off or land heavy. Landing heavy on one engine was a recipe for a collapsed landing gear and a runway fire. They had to lighten the ship. His eyes scanned the cluttered hangar, landing on a heavy steel tool chest. Weight. It was all about weight. Okay, new plan. You can't dump it, so you have to use it. You need to increase power on the right engine to maintain control, which burns fuel faster. It's a gamble, more heat on the only engine you have left. But you have no choice. Set your mixture for max burn. Keep your altitude as long as you can, but your primary goal is to get that fuel weight down. How many souls on board? 5 plus 2 crew. 7 people. Leo's watch showed 11:22. Sam would be in math class right now, puzzling over fractions. The normality of that image steadied him. He spoke again. Briggs, I need you to put me on speaker in the cabin. A click, then the ambient noise of the cabin filled the phone, the ragged breathing, the unbalanced whine. This is Leo Vance, the mechanic. Everyone can hear me. We are in a serious situation, but we have a procedure. You will all follow Pilot Briggs's instructions exactly. There is no room for panic. Your job right now is to stay calm and brace if instructed. Do you understand? A chorus of shaky affirmatives. Then a woman's voice, clear but trembling. It was Alexandra. Leo, what are our odds? He didn't sugarcoat it. Better than they were 2 minutes ago. Worse than they will be in 10 minutes if we do this right. Now let me work with your pilot. He took them off speaker. For the next 8 minutes, it was a brutal technical ballet. Leo guided Briggs through a slow, shallow turn back toward the airport, minimizing stress on the remaining engine. He had him cycle auxiliary systems to offload the electrical generator. He told him to prepare the cabin for a possible emergency landing, seats upright, belts tight, loose items secured. Every 30 seconds, Briggs called out the right engine temperature. It was a relentless creep into the yellow caution zone, edging toward red. Meanwhile, on the ground, chaos was brewing. Rick, the boss, had heard the Mayday call over the airfield's radio. He came running into the hangar, face pale. What did you do? Did you miss something? Leo covered the phone's mic. The left engine failed. They're coming back on one engine. Call the tower. Tell them we have a phone patch with the aircraft. Get fire and rescue to the runway. Now, Rick. The airfield, usually sleepy, erupted into activity. Fire trucks rolled out. The control tower, which mostly handled small planes, was suddenly coordinating with regional air traffic control to clear all airspace. News helicopters, monitoring police scanners, were already lifting off from the city, drawn to the drama of a distressed private jet. At 11:31, Briggs's voice tightened. Leo, right engine temp is in the red. We're losing power, I can feel it. We're still 5 miles out. The calculus had changed. The engine was cooking itself. If it failed now, they would drop like a stone. They were too low to glide 5 miles. They needed to land immediately, but they were still too heavy. The fuel gauge was coming down, but not fast enough. Leo's brain fired. There was one more weight-saving measure, desperate and dangerous. It was in the manual under wartime procedures. Briggs, you need to dump all your hydraulic fluid. There was a stunned silence. Are you insane? That runs the landing gear, the flaps, the brakes. I know what it runs. Leo's calm finally cracked, a hairline fracture of urgency. You have an emergency extension system for the gear, its gravity and manual pumps. The flaps you can live without for a fast landing. The brakes, you won't have any. But you will have a plane light enough to keep that right engine alive for 5 more minutes. If that engine quits, you won't need brakes because you'll be digging a crater. There's a manual dump valve under the cockpit floor. Do you see it? He heard scrambling, cursing. Found it. Pull it now. A new sound joined the cabin noise, a high-pressure hiss like a giant sigh. The jet, suddenly relieved of several 100 pounds of fluid, seemed to lurch upward slightly. The right engine's temperature gauge, critically, stopped its climb. It stabilized, deep in the red but holding. Fuel weight was now almost at landing threshold. The airport was 3 miles away. They could see it, but they had a new, monumental problem. As Briggs had said, with no hydraulics, the landing gear was down and locked only by gravity. The flaps, which slow a plane for landing, were inoperative. They were coming in hot, heavy, and with no way to stop on the runway. Briggs's voice was grim. Runway 27 is clear. Winds are light. We're going to have a lot of excess speed. We'll run off the end. Leo looked out the hangar door. The runway ended in a chain-link fence, then a field of tall, dry grass, then a line of trees. He made another call. Aim for the grass field past the runway. It's long, it's levelish. It's your best chance to slow down without hitting anything solid. Ditch in the field. Copy, ditching in the field. The control tower confirmed the plan. Fire trucks repositioned, racing down the perimeter road toward the field. The news helicopters circled at a distance, their cameras zooming in. On the phone, Leo heard the landing gear warning horn blare, a constant grating whine because the gear was down, but the plane was configured for a high-speed crash landing. Alexandra's voice came over the line again, quiet, meant only for him. Leo, I'm sorry for what I said. He didn't respond. There was no time for absolution. He simply said, brace for impact. And to Briggs, he gave his final instruction. Keep the nose up as long as you can. Let the belly take the friction. You're a pilot. Fly it all the way to the stop. Then there was only the sound of the phone connection and the waiting. Leo stood frozen in the middle of the hangar, surrounded by the tools of his trade, utterly powerless. He heard the change in engine pitch as Briggs reduced power. He heard the co-pilot calling out altitudes, 500 feet, 300, 150. The last thing he heard from the cockpit was Briggs, calm and clear, and contact. Then a sound that was not an explosion, but a colossal, tearing, grinding roar of metal meeting earth at 100 miles an hour. It went on and on, a nightmare of screeching and rending. Then, silence. A silence more terrible than any noise. The phone line was dead. The silence on the phone lasted 10 seconds. Then, from the direction of the field, a new sound, the wail of sirens converging and the distant, tinny crackle of a firefighter's radio. Leo was already running, his heart a hammer against his ribs. He vaulted a fence, his boots pounding the hard dirt. The field was a scene of controlled chaos. The Gulfstream sat at a crooked angle, its nose buried in a furrow of torn earth, its right wingtip snapped clean off. A plume of dust and dirt hung in the air. But crucially, there was no fire. Firefighters surrounded the fuselage. The main cabin door was being pried open, and then one by one figures emerged. First a flight attendant stumbling, supported by a medic. Then the co-pilot walking under his own power. Then Alexandra Thorne's CFO clutching his arm. Then her assistant. Finally, Alexandra herself, guided down the emergency slide. She stood on the torn grass, staring back at the wreck of her $12 million jet, shaking uncontrollably. Last out was pilot Briggs, the last man off. his uniform smudged with dirt. He scanned the crowd of responders, his eyes locking on Leo. He gave a single, slow nod. All 7 souls were alive, bruised, battered, in shock, but alive. It was, by every metric, a miracle. Paramedics descended, wrapping people in blankets, leading them to ambulances. The news helicopters buzzed overhead, capturing every moment. Leo stood at the edge of the response perimeter, a spectator now. His part was over. But it was just beginning. By that afternoon, the story was national news. Tech CEOs jet crashes in dramatic emergency landing. Mystery mechanic talks plane down from ground. The narrative wrote itself. A humble, grease-stained mechanic becomes an unlikely hero. Reporters swarmed the small airfield. They wanted Leo. Rick, smelling positive publicity, suddenly became his champion, giving interviews about their rigorous safety culture. Leo refused to speak. He had one priority: getting to Sam's school before the boy heard a scary, distorted version on the news. He was too late. When he pulled up, a local news van was already parked outside the elementary school. Sam's teacher had kept him inside. The boy ran to him, face pale. "Dad, they said your plane crashed." Leo hugged him tight. "Everyone's okay, buddy. The plane is broken, but the people are safe, because we did our jobs." He took Sam home, shut the blinds, and turned off his phone. The institutional machinery was grinding to life. The Federal Aviation Administration and the National Transportation Safety Board dispatched a GO team. By evening, the wreckage was cordoned off as a federal investigation site. The preliminary question was obvious. What caused the left engine to fail so catastrophically on takeoff? The answer would determine liability, insurance payouts, and possibly criminal negligence. The first break came from the flight data recorder, the black box. It confirmed Briggs's account: a sudden, catastrophic loss of oil pressure followed by a massive temperature spike. This pointed not to a sensor ghost, but to a physical failure: a broken oil line, a seized pump, a blown seal. The NTSB investigator in charge, a methodical woman named Dr. Aris, requested all maintenance records for the aircraft. This is where the story twisted. The records provided by the selling investment firm showed a pristine service history, culminating in the full inspection signed off by Apex Aviation just 3 weeks prior. But when Dr. Aris sent her team to physically examine the failed engine, now crumpled in the field, they found something that didn't match the paperwork. A critical high-pressure oil line had been replaced, according to the Apex report, with a brand new, certified part. The serial number on the installed part, however, was for a unit that had been manufactured over a decade ago and had been listed as scrapped by the manufacturer after failing a quality audit. It was a counterfeit part, a perfect, deadly fake. When confronted, Apex Aviation was shocked, or feigned shock. They provided invoices from their parts supplier, a seemingly reputable firm called Skyward Components. The chain of blame began to slither backwards, but for Dr. Aris, the immediate point of failure was clear: the pre-purchase inspection done at this very airfield, the one signed by Leo Vance. Her team descended on Leo's hangar. They were polite, professional, and utterly relentless. They audited his tools, his certifications, his logs. They interviewed Rick. They found Leo's handwritten note on his work order about the intermittent oil pressure flicker. This was the bombshell. "You noted a potential problem, Mr. Vance, yet you signed the final release certificate stating no discrepancies. Can you explain that?" Leo explained the pressure from his boss, the provided Apex report, the owner's dismissal. It sounded weak, even to his own ears. The investigators exchanged glances. The narrative in their minds was forming: a corner-cutting local shop, a mechanic pressured to look the other way for a big fee, a fake part, and a near-mass casualty event. They didn't say he was a criminal. They said he was a person of interest. They suspended his A&P license on the spot, pending the full investigation. He was grounded. The story in the media pivoted overnight. The headline changed from "Hero Mechanic" to "Investigation Focuses on Local Shop After Crash." Rick, in a panic, gave a new interview. Leo is a dedicated mechanic, but he was the lead on that inspection. I have to let the process play out. It was a betrayal wrapped in corporate speak. Leo was now toxic. The phone didn't ring with job offers. It rang with lawyers. Alexandra Thorne, from her penthouse convalescence, watched this unfold. Her physical injuries were minor: whiplash, a sprained wrist. The psychological wounds were deeper. The shame of her insult was now compounded by a dawning, horrifying understanding. Her rush to close a deal, her dismissal of Leo's concern, had directly contributed to the situation. She had chosen the clean report over the greasy mechanic's intuition, and then that same mechanic had pulled her from the fire. The cognitive dissonance was paralyzing. Her board advised silence. Let the investigation run. Any comment could be seen as admission of liability. But Alexandra had built her empire on seeing patterns others missed. She hired a private forensic firm separate from the NTSB. She told them to follow the money, not the insurance money but the parts money, who profited from selling a counterfeit oil line. Her team dug into Skyward Components. It was a shell company, registered to a holding firm in Delaware, which was owned by another entity in the Cayman Islands. The trail was deliberately cold, but they found a connection. One of the silent investors in the web of holding companies was a name she recognized, a rival venture capitalist who had been trying to sabotage her Denver deal for months. This wasn't just negligence. This was corporate sabotage aimed at her. The faulty part wasn't a random accident. It was a targeted weapon, and Leo Vance had been the unwitting canary in the coal mine. She realized something else. Leo had taken the fall. The public, the FAA, they saw a mechanic who missed a fake part, but he'd actually been the only one who even suspected a problem. He tried to warn her. She had silenced him. Now he was losing his livelihood, his reputation, possibly his freedom, while the real perpetrators hid behind offshore accounts. 1 week after the crash, Alexandra did something her board called reckless. She called a press conference. Standing before a bank of microphones, her arm in a sling, she did not talk about her trauma. She named the rival firm. She laid out the evidence of sabotage her team had uncovered. And then she turned to the camera, her voice clear and sharp. The investigation is focusing on the wrong person. The mechanic, Leo Vance, identified a risk that a 12-page report from a supposedly elite facility missed. He was overruled. By me. His expertise saved our lives. He does not deserve to be scapegoated for a crime meant to target me. I am providing all our findings to the authorities, and I will be personally covering Mr. Vance's legal defense. The room erupted. The story twisted again. Now it was a thriller, corporate espionage, a targeted assassination via aircraft, and a CEO with a guilty conscience fighting for the little guy. The NTSB, inundated with this new information, was forced to expand its scope. The FBI opened a parallel investigation into the part's fraud and possible attempted murder. For Leo, watching the press conference on a small TV in his silent apartment, it was a surreal vindication. His son Sam looked up at him. "Dad, is the rich lady on your side now?" Leo didn't know how to answer. A check from Alexandra's lawyer arrived the next day, retainer for a top-tier aviation defense attorney. It was more money than he made in a year. He wanted to tear it up. His own lawyer, a sharp woman named Costa, told him to cash it. "This isn't charity, Leo. It's a weapon. And you need it." The fight was now on two fronts: the federal safety investigation that could end his career, and a criminal conspiracy case that stretched into shadowy boardrooms. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was a key witness in something much bigger. And the people who planted that fake part now had two targets: Alexandra Thorne and the man who could technically prove they'd almost succeeded. The first warning came 3 days later, a late-night hang-up call. Then his delivery truck parked outside was vandalized, the words "accident prone" keyed into the paint. It was a message: back off, know your place. Leo stood in the dark, looking at the gouged metal. He thought of Sam, sleeping inside. He thought of the screaming engine on the phone. He thought of the counterfeit part and the faceless men who thought human lives were an acceptable line item. The quiet, contained anger he'd carried for years, since the day he became a single father, finally found a focus. This wasn't about saving a plane anymore. It was about exposing a system that valued profit over lives and reputation over truth. He called his lawyer. Then he called Alexandra Thorne. When she answered, he said only one thing. "You started this. Now tell me everything you know." The alliance between the mechanic and the CEO was forged not in a boardroom, but over a scratched Formica table in Leo's kitchen, with Sam's crayon drawings on the fridge as witness. Alexandra arrived alone, without assistants or lawyers, wearing jeans and looking exhausted. She laid it all out. The rival firm, the Cayman Islands paper trail, her conviction that the fake part was meant to cause her death or derail her deal. Leo listened, then spread out his own evidence. The maintenance manual for the Gulfstream, his handwritten notes, and photographs of similar counterfeit parts he'd seen whispers about in industry forums. A shadow economy of fake aircraft components. Their skills were complementary. He understood the asterisk, the physical failure, the installation points, the supply chain weak spots. She understood the asterisk, the financial incentives, the corporate rivalries, the pressure points. Together, they built a map for Leo's lawyer and the FBI. They identified a pattern. The counterfeit parts weren't just random fakes. They were strategically inserted into aircraft owned or used by specific, disruptive companies or individuals. It was sabotage as a service. The FBI moved quickly with the new roadmap. They raided the offices of Skyward Components, finding them empty but retrieving servers. The digital trail led back to the rival venture capital firm, and then to a retired procurement manager from Apex Aviation who'd been on their payroll. The scheme unraveled like a bad suture. Arrests were made. The national story became a scandal. The fake parts ring that targeted Silicon Valley. Throughout it all, the FAA's administrative case against Leo continued. His hearing was a tense, technical affair. Alexandra testified, taking full responsibility for overriding his professional judgment. Pilot Briggs testified, detailing how Leo's knowledge had directly saved their lives. The NTSB's Dr. Aris, now in possession of the FBI's evidence, submitted a report that exonerated Leo, stating the counterfeit part was virtually undetectable in a standard inspection, and that his note about the oil pressure flicker was, in fact, the only red flag anyone had raised. The judge restored Leo's A and P license unconditionally. The verdict was more than professional vindication, it was a public cleansing. Rick, contrite and fearing lawsuits, offered him a partnership. Leo declined. He was done working for someone else's invoice. In the months that followed, the fallout was profound. The rival VC firm collapsed under the weight of lawsuits and criminal charges. New regulations were proposed in Congress, dubbed the Vance Thorne Amendments, mandating stricter traceability for aircraft parts. Alexandra's company, its reputation ironically enhanced by her very public fight for accountability, secured its Denver deal. But the most significant changes were personal. Alexandra sold her remaining Jet share. She started a foundation focused on vocational training for single parents, funding scholarships for A and P license programs. The first donation was anonymously covered by Leo's returned legal retainer. He refused to take her money. Instead, Leo used his restored credibility and his sudden, hard-won fame to launch his own venture. He called it Vance Verification. It was a boutique mobile aircraft inspection service that operated on one principle. The mechanic's word was final, and no financial pressure would ever override a safety call. His first client, booked solid for a year, was a consortium of tech executives who had learned a brutal lesson about the true cost of cutting corners. His second client was the local regional airline, who wanted his eye on their fleet. 1 year to the day after the crash, Leo stood in a different hangar, a clean, well-lit space he was leasing for his new business. Sam, now 8, was helping by organizing sockets. The door opened, and Alexandra Thorne walked in, no longer in a white blazer but in practical clothes. She'd come to ask a question. "I'm buying a helicopter for the foundation for emergency medical transport. I need it inspected by someone I trust, not a firm, a person. Will you do it?" Leo looked at her, then at Sam, then around at his own shop. He nodded. "I'll need the full maintenance history, and I start at $250 an hour." "Fair," she said, "and Leo, thank you for everything." He shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just promise you'll listen to the next mechanic, even if he smells like grease." She smiled, a real one without any armor. "I promise." After she left, Leo finished his workday. He drove Sam to get ice cream. That evening, as he tucked his son into bed, Sam asked, "Dad, are we heroes?" Leo thought about the long, grinding investigation, the fear, the vandalized truck, the quiet desperation of almost losing everything. He thought about the 7 people who went home to their families because of a combination of skill, luck, and a desperate phone call. "No, buddy," he said. "We're just mechanics. We fix things. Sometimes the thing that's broken is an engine. Sometimes it's something bigger." The final surprise came in the mail a week later. It wasn't a check or a legal document. It was a small, carefully wrapped package. Inside, on a bed of foam, was a single, sheared-off bolt recovered from the wrecked Gulfstream's left engine. It was the specific bolt that had held the counterfeit oil line in place. Attached was a note from Dr. Aris at the NTSB. "This is the point of failure. You identified the risk. You diagnosed the crisis. You helped us find the cause. Most people never see the full circle. Keep it. A reminder that expertise matters." Leo placed the bolt on his workbench, not as a trophy, but as a calibration weight. A reminder that in a world of glossy reports and financial pressure, truth often wears coveralls and comes with the scent of honest work. He flipped off the hangar lights, locked up, and drove home to his son, the silent tarmac under a sky full of planes, each one relying on the invisible, honest hands that kept them safe. The story that began with an insult on a tarmac ends with a bolt on a workbench, a full circle from perceived flaw to fundamental truth. What we witnessed was more than a dramatic rescue. It was a collision of 2 worlds, one that values the appearance of success and another that understands the substance of safety. In that moment of crisis, all the titles, the net worth, the designer blazers meant nothing. The only currency was knowledge. The specific, hard one, grease under the fingernails knowledge of how things actually work. This narrative exposes a silent hierarchy we rarely question. We celebrate the pilots, the CEOs, the visible faces of progress. Yet the entire modern world is held aloft by a vast, unseen network of experts like Leo Vance, the mechanics, the technicians, the engineers who speak the silent language of machinery. Their expertise is often invisible until it is. Until a bolt shears, an engine seizes, a system fails. Then suddenly, their judgment becomes the only thing that matters. The counterfeit parts scandal revealed the dark side of this neglect. When we devalue expertise, when we prioritize cost over quality and speed over thoroughness, we create shadows where fraud can flourish. The fake part was a symptom. The disease was a system that had forgotten how to listen to the person who smells like the job. Leo and Alexandra's journey is a blueprint for correction. It wasn't about a mechanic becoming a CEO or a CEO becoming a mechanic. It was about both recognizing the integrity of the other's domain. Leo needed to reclaim the authority of his expertise. Alexandra needed to learn the humility of true listening. Their alliance proved that competence is not about rank, but about respect for the chain of cause and effect. So the next time you board a plane, drive a car, or even flip a light switch, consider the chain of expertise that allows it. Think of the countless checks, the hands that fitted each part, the eyes that inspected every connection. We live in a world built by specialists. Our safety, our progress, our very lives are in their hands. Perhaps it's time we stopped judging those hands by their stains and started valuing them by their steadiness. If you believe that real skill deserves recognition, that the quiet experts among us hold our world together, then subscribe. We tell the stories of the people who work in the background, because sometimes the most important person in the room is the one we never thought to look at twice.